Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome everyone to this session of the Recovery and Wellness series. I'm Shelley Rogers with Granite Wellness Centers. Granite Wellness hosts the Recovery and Wellness series as a way to engage with the communities we serve around topics related to recovery and wellness. Our previous session and today's, titled Conversations About Culture and Healing, gives us an opportunity to enter into a brave space where we learn and share about lived experiences, culture, equity, inequities, and healing. We have some amazing presenters today that have been so generous with their time in planning and their passion for wanting to speak to you today about this topic. And when our presenters begin, we ask that you listen with an open mind to learn, with an open heart to love, and to trust these lived experiences. The presenters want you to feel free to enter your questions and comments in the Q&A. They'll be prompting you. There are a couple of specific times where they really want your input, and they want you to engage in the Q&A. They may have an opportunity to address your questions and comments live, but time is also reserved at the end to answer any questions and to reflect on the comments. Again, I want to thank all of our presenters for entering this brave space with us today and being willing to share their stories and ideas. And a very special thank you to Shamari Roy, adolescent peer counselor with Granite Wellness, because it is her passion that was the inspiration for these particular sessions. And now I'm going to turn it over to a very good friend of mine, Jamal Walker, who's going to open up and begin today's session, Conversations About Culture and Healing, Bridging the Gap in Communication Between Black African Americans and the Community. Hi, Jamal, welcome.
Hi, Shelley, thank you so much. Welcome everyone to this gathering. And yeah, just want to show my appreciation for those who have joined and wanted to take part in this, in our efforts to work towards healing between our communities. So let's see here. As I was working with Shamari and LaShawn in particular, in the beginning stages of putting this together, we were talking about the ways in which our communication styles between Black and white can often be very different. And so we wanted to, I was gifted this quote by my mother, who also does this work professionally. And it was from a book called Black and White Styles in Conflict by Thomas Kochman. So I'm going to go ahead and read this quote, as it gave us a lot to talk about in the differing styles and how that can affect the way that we engage with one another. Modes of behavior. The modes of behavior that Blacks and whites consider appropriate for engaging in public debate differ in their stance and level of spiritual intensity. The Black mode, that of Black community people, is high-keyed, animated, interpersonal, and confrontational. The loud and generates affect. The second is characteristic of detachment and is cool, quiet, and without affect. So we wanted to give you all some time to think about what that quote might mean to you as you break down what was stated in that quote, and enter some, if you have questions or comments or thoughts on that, to enter that into the Q&A. And, we want also for people to be able to really talk about this stuff from the heart space. Oftentimes, it's very difficult, I think, for all of us as humans to engage with the heart space when we're talking about things of this nature. And we go to our head space and sometimes abandon the heart space. So what I would like to say about listening from the heart, some thoughts that come to my mind is to listen to understand rather than waiting for your opportunity to rebut what was said. Listen to really want to know. I think it's also important to notice what are the things that might get in the way of you being able to stay centered in the heart space and not be looking for rebuttal or a chance to jump in and say something or to refute something. What are the things that get in the way for you? What are some of the feelings that might come up for you? Notice what's happening in your body as we continue on with this conversation. Notice what fears might come up, or is there anger or sadness or mistrust or incredulity that comes up for you? Another thing that I think about when listening from the heart is, how would I want someone else to be present for me if I was sharing my heart about something? How would I want people to show up for me? So that's another way that another thing that helps me to get centered into the heart space. What kinds of traits or qualities would you like your listening partner to exhibit that would help you to feel that they're truly present for you? Another thought is, what would you need from your listening partner in order to feel heard? Are you willing to give that same attentiveness that you would want for yourself? Are you willing to give that as a listener? So those are some thoughts about listening from the heart that I'd like for us to carry with us as we move forward with our gathering today.
One thing I'd like to say too, kind of about this quote, is sometimes I feel like when we are, communicating, we think it's just about a communicator and a listener. And there are tons of aspects that go into a communication process. It's not always just talking and listening. It's also, external stimuli. It could be your beliefs and your understanding of a situation that you bring into this communication process. And sometimes that can be useful, but sometimes it can also be harmful. And when it comes to someone's experience, it's best that this is kind of why we want to bring up this topic, because when it comes to someone else's experience, your beliefs and your understanding isn't always helpful in that communication process. Sometimes it's just listening and being compassionate, and like Jamal is saying, listening from your heart and not from your head, not bringing in logic and what you know, what you come to understand. So that's kind of what that quote brought up for me was, sometimes having these two different styles of communication can build a wall or build a block for some people because it's not their way of understanding. So they're automatically going to put up a block, and that's not always helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shamari. One of the things that I think about most about this quote is just thinking about as a Black man and knowing that, I have this style of communicating, which, I also want to say that I've learned also what's being called here as the white mode. And that's something that we might be able to get into a little bit as well, because as a Black man, I've had to learn how to operate in that mode too, in order to be able to be respected. That's one thing that's really important for me to bring up about this quote, that the quote unquote Black mode is not well respected in white spaces. So it's looked at as often looked at as inferior, often looked at as unprofessional. So there's a way in which that being able to communicate how I would communicate naturally, being part of a Black community, people, so to speak, takes away some of my own humanity, because I'm not able to bring my full self to the table as it is. So that's one aspect of that quote that I wanted to share with you all.
Hello everyone, my name is Madera Isang and I'm 18 years old. I'm a Nigerian artist, and I wanted to touch on what Jamal said and also explain why I was very excited and eager to join this panel. And it is because as people of the Black community, we do oftentimes have to kind of separate ourselves from the way we would traditionally speak or go about expressing ourselves in white spaces. And sadly, therapy and mental wellness has for a long time been something that the Black community has shunned as a white practice. So I was excited to join this panel to discuss each of our individual experiences with the quote unquote white mode and how that may have affected our journeys in mental health and with mental health practitioners. So I would like to say thank you definitely to everyone watching and all of my fellow panelists and Granite Wellness for just having this amazing opportunity. And yes, definitely active listening, empathetic listening is extremely important. And yeah, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis. I am currently a student at Texas A&M University, so I am coming in from over here in Texas. When I see this quote, I have been introduced to it a few times because Jamal is my father, and then he was talking about how his mother had introduced this, and so she's my grandmother, and she's also introduced this to me. And something that comes up for me when I read this quote is an experience that my father had told me about his cousins. He had gone to an event and he had seen his cousins getting in an argument outside the house. And it was very lively. It was a lively debate. And but upon finishing this, reconciliation happened, and they were able to go in and enjoy the event without holding any grudges, without holding any hostility toward one another. And what's really beautiful to me about that is that people in the Black community who experience this type of behavior, these modes of behavior, the Black mode, are able to kind of hash out things that they're experiencing and feeling without holding on to things and later using them as ways to experience anger and frustration at specific people. But what's difficult is that as an outsider, as a person who I grew up in a white community, and even though I am biracial, seeing it as an outsider and being someone who wasn't around it all the time, it can be perceived as violent. And I think it's important to recognize that that's not the case necessarily. And just, I think it's really amazing that there is a space that has been offered to discuss that, so that we can be more empathetic and more understanding of these different modes. So thank you. I'm glad everyone's here.
Thank you, Alexis. I completely agree with you. I'm happy that we have the opportunity to share this space with each other and have such a difficult conversation. And I wanted to end the discussion with this quote by saying I originally wasn't going to say anything about the quote because I thought it was very self-explanatory. But I also thought that a lot of people may have the idea that we're asking them to change who they are. And it's not that we're asking you to change who you are, but we're asking that you make it a part of your foundation to make room for who others genuinely are and how you want to be remembered as you enter into each other's spaces. And again, as Madeira said, thank you all for joining us.
And before we do move on, we encourage if anyone has any questions or comments about this quote, we would love to discuss anything you guys would like to discuss, or we can save it for the end. That's fine too. Yeah, we definitely want to hear from you guys and see, what are your thoughts or comments.
It looks like we have a hand raised. Cindy.
Hi, that quote really kind of blows me away in just twisting my perception differently as how I would have viewed it without adding the Black mode on, because I thought that that's more higher class business people, because I have to control myself when I speak, because I'm very passionate and I've had to learn to regulate my emotions in the business world, right? Are you following me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm following.
And so I kind of thought it was more of a preppy upper class. I don't think I would have thought white, but I guess I would. I kind of feel, I grew up in the country. I'm not much of a city girl, but I felt the same way about having to change the way that I speak to fit in. So this was really interesting to me. Really interesting. I really appreciate it.
I would like to comment on that. Thank you so much, Cindy, for mentioning that. Another conversation, I have a lot of these conversations with my mother. Her name is Isoke Femi. And so both Alexis and I have lots of these types of discussions with Mama. And one of the things that we talked about just the other day was that, and I think it's really important to note that there is a distinction made here in this quote where it says the white mode, that of the middle class. So that's a key point there. I was talking with Isoke the other day about how, when I talk to people more, a lot more working class white people, and, you mentioned being from the country, people who are like, I was having this conversation with my mom and said, there's not that much difference between hillbilly and ghetto. It's just color. But really, we behave in much similar ways. And so you'll find this same kind of, a similar kind of Black mode, as it's being termed here, of speaking with a more working class, maybe a little bit more backwoods, a little bit more hillbilly white folks that operate in a very similar fashion. So I did want to make that comment about this. And you'll also find that there are Black folks who are more affluent and have taken on more of the quote unquote white mode. But in a general sense, I think that it's pretty common for us as Black people, as a part of our culture, that this is how we communicate. And I think some of that comes, goes back far back to before us even setting foot on this continent. It's a cultural style, it's a spiritual style of communication.
So I did want to share one of the comments that we got in the Q&A. It says, this brings up my experience about 20 years ago. I grew up in an all-white community and lived in several mostly white communities until this time. I then moved into North Minnesota in a mostly Black community. At first, I was scared because of the way people in the neighborhood communicated. It took me about a year to understand that my neighbors were not always mad at each other, and I became almost jealous of the freedom of expression I never had in my past. So I thought that was an amazing experience to share. Thank you for sharing that.
Very good. Thank you.
And it looks like we have another hand raised, Kevin.
Hi, thank you for being a part of this wonderful discussion today. My name is Kevin Vasquez and I'm a Latino. And I'm not too sure if this is a question or it's probably more of a comment. I just kind of wanted to piggyback on something that Jamal said, which I really appreciate and understand. And that's, I think over time, really understanding how to navigate and be successful in the business world, and how that really, as a minority, we've had to kind of train ourselves in order to speak the right language and display ourselves appropriately in order to, reach those certain milestones through business. And I think this movement that we're seeing today, which I appreciate what you all are doing right now, and I think we're seeing it across many different minority groups, is the honesty and communication, and really reaching out to people and just educating them on how different groups talk. I mean, I go back and I look at my childhood, and I being raised in a Latino family, and I grew up I'm from Denver, and I grew up in the inner city for a while. And then I think it was just my folks at that time realizing they needed to kind of integrate into a different community in order to provide certain modalities of success for their kids. And so, we grew up in a white, for me, it was the biggest transition because I grew up in an all Black neighborhood. But then when we moved into white suburbia, it was a different environment with your neighbors, the schooling, all those kinds of stuff. So it was almost like being brought up in a different kind of modality for how to communicate. So it gave me, I guess, a certain learning curve of, okay, I learned early how to navigate the systems and learned how to communicate. But in a certain way, I feel like I've lost a lot. I remember, when you all are talking about the Black mode of conversation, I would argue that there's also a brown mode. I can't tell you the number of family conversations as a kid that I was a part of where people would be outdoors and family gatherings, just having it out. But then all of a sudden, you're right, there's this coming back together because everyone understood that common way of communicating. And it wasn't like someone was angry at another, it was just understanding how you talk. And so it just kind of, it worked its way out. And so in my personal perspective, I miss a lot of that. I miss that honesty because I feel, in a lot of ways, it's lacking in the business community. I can't tell you how refreshing it is when you have leadership that is willing to have that honest communication, and how much more effective it is, I think, for the staff and everyone to work effectively within that environment. So, again, I just applaud you all for doing what you're doing today. And I hope it lends itself to that honest communication that I think we really need across not only our personal communities, but our professional communities.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I think it is very important to have this platform, not only for us, but I think having open dialogue is helpful. And not a lot of people know or understand, maybe just this, modes of communication and how different it is. And one thing, I took a class on intercultural communication, and it was the first time that I was introduced to code switching, which is something that I've done my entire life and didn't realize that there was a title to it. And, it's sometimes it just takes education and speaking and talking and researching and having platforms like this for people in our community to be able to address these issues. So we're just really happy you guys are all here and that we are able to open this up for everyone. Okay, so I think we're going to move forward. And if you still have questions or comments, we can save that for the end. Oh, Kevin, I saw your question. We can talk a little bit about code switching at the end. So right now we're going to go into our lived experience stories. So I will go first. I will be reading from a piece of paper, so I apologize if my gaze is down, but I feel like I can get my point across a little bit better if I read through what I wrote. So I want to start out by thanking everyone for being here. We wanted to come together and present an exercise of listening from your heart. One of the biggest things the Black community needs is allyship. With allyship comes understanding. One thing we talked about in our many planning meetings and what Jamal discussed before is how we as human beings connect through telling stories. And it is the best way to understand the world through another person's eyes. Communication is a process that involves a communicator and a listener, and it also involves things like environmental stimuli, beliefs, prior knowledge, and more. Sometimes we want to take our own beliefs and experiences and filter it into what we are hearing from others, and this sometimes contributes to communication blocks. This is what we are here to address today, because listening from the heart does not involve us trying to convince someone that their feelings are not valid, even if we don't necessarily believe them. It can be as simple as validating someone and being there for them. So I wanted to share a little bit of my experience of navigating spaces that suppressed my Blackness and discredited my culture. Some of my first memories are of living with my father in Texas. I lived there for only about 9 months, but I was 6 years old, so it felt like forever. I developed a bit of a country twang from living in the South. Of course, I had not noticed it, but I was quickly made aware by other children and adults around me that I spoke funny once I returned here to California. To avoid being singled out, I started to pay close attention to how I articulated my sentences, making sure not to use words like ain't or bout, and making sure to enunciate so others could understand me. Little did I know the way that I spoke wasn't wrong, it was just different. It was closer to the African-American vernacular English that I had grown up accustomed to living in Conroe, Texas. AAVE is not a widely accepted dialect, and I unfortunately learned this at a young age. The ridicule came not only from friends, but from family as well. Growing up, I had a blended family culturally. My grandmother was born in India and raised in California from a very young age. And my grandpa was born in Oklahoma and also moved to California at a young age. Most of my family gatherings were with my grandma's side of the family. And that side of the family, culturally, it wasn't just Indian. So we had, I had an aunt who was Filipino, I had an aunt who was Hispanic, I had an aunt who was white. So it was just a big blend of people. In these settings, my mom, her brother, and I were the only Black people. My grandparents were divorced. So my grandpa's side of the family, who lived in mainly in Fresno, rarely came around. And although they didn't intend to, our family made it aware that we were different and that our skin color was different from theirs. You can only imagine their reaction when they heard me speak after returning from Texas. I soon became so self-conscious about the way that I spoke. As I got older, the country twang went away, and I began to speak in a way that seemed more socially acceptable to those around me. But something about the way that I spoke bothered me. It wasn't the actual manner to which I articulated, but the backhanded comments I would get from the people. People I didn't even know would say, "Wow, you speak so well," or "You're so articulate," or "Are you part white?" And I knew that those first two comments came with an unspoken for a Black person. Those comments didn't make me feel special or feel empowered. They made me feel degraded and unseen. People began labeling me before they even interacted with me, and that did not sit right with me. I now know that the way that I spoke before was in no way wrong or bad. I love the fact that when I am in a room full of Black people, I can communicate with them in a way that I cannot with others. It makes me feel connected and safe. And communication is a piece and a part of culture. And so telling me that the way that I speak is chipping away at a part of me. And being that, you know, Black culture has already been so suppressed, and a lot of it was taken away during, you know, slavery and segregation. Any piece of culture that we can hold on to is extremely important. It's not as simple as just communication. It's a piece of me. So yeah, I hope that you guys can kind of, when you move forward and hear, you know, a style of communication, not just from a Black person, but, you know, like Kevin was saying, there's all different sorts of ways that, you know, within cultures that people communicate. So come at it with an open mind, because it's just because it's different from you doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong or bad. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, guys. I think next we have Jamal. Yes.
Right. Thank you, Shamari. So the picture that is on the screen is a picture of my youngest child, my son. And this was from about 10 years ago. And I just thought it was appropriate for this story that I'm going to share. I'm actually going to share his story rather than my own. And this picture just reminds me of just how deeply thoughtful he is, and how profoundly hurt he's been by racism. I can remember from times when he was quite young, right around that same age that Shamari was noticing things, around 6, kindergarten, and coming home from school, talking about things that he had heard, either other young kids his age speaking about near him or to him directly. Some of the things that I remember, you know, one I remember him saying, and this is in kindergarten, with one of his classmates saying, you can't trust Black people because they lie. Other stories that he would come home and tell, you know, from his classmates, you know, Black people are thieves. And several other comments at a very young age, you know, and these, again, coming from classmates. Moving on a little later, I believe he was in the 2nd grade, and he came home. He had had a very hard day at school, and he came home very dejected. And his mother and I sat down with him and asked him what was wrong, what was going on. And he was just sobbing. Just imagine the look that you see on the screen, with far more dejection, and just sobbing with his head in his hands. And then he looks up and he says, "Dad, why do they hate us so much?" You know, this is from a 2nd grader, already carrying this burden of racism, knowing at that young of an age that there's hatred towards people who look like him, because it had become a daily experience for him of experiencing that hatred coming from others, and the things that they would say and things that they would do to him. I think the reason why I wanted to share his story, I certainly have plenty of stories of my own to share, but the reason why I wanted to share his story is because of the way that it impacted me as a father. And in particular, not being able to answer his question. I didn't have an answer for it. when he asked me, why do they hate us so much? And the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that I felt as a parent and not being able to give him an answer. And I think one of the other reasons why I wanted to share his story is because I want for those of you viewing to know that this is very routine in the lives of young Black children, and especially when we're talking about mental health. Try to imagine what it might be like from a mental health perspective to be carrying this kind of energy from as early as the age of 6. And now, I've raised him in Nevada County in Grass Valley, and he's born and raised here, as Alexis is as well. Imagine what that's like for a young child to carry the idea that the place that they're born and raised in, they're not accepted. It's not okay for them to be who they are, meaning it's not okay for them to be Black. Imagine what it might feel like to not feel safe in the place that you were born and raised. Imagine what it might feel like when you're being given the idea that you being a Black person, you are a liar, you're a thief, you're dangerous, and yet you're the one experiencing all the danger and all the violence. Meanwhile, you're being told that you're the one who's dangerous and violent and untrustworthy. Think about that from a mental health standpoint. And all my kids have experienced this. So, yeah, I think that's why I wanted to share that story. And I'll leave it there. And next, we're going to go on to Madeira.
Hi, my name is Madeira, for everyone new that's joined. I am 18 years old and I am a Nigerian artist, and I'll be sharing a story with you all today. So at my old job, there was another Nigerian girl around the same age as me. We worked at a restaurant bussing tables together. Around the second or third day of us both working there, or actually the second or third month, pardon me, she had to submit a sexual harassment claim against one of the waiters. Maybe 2 to 3 days after she submitted her claim, our manager, who the entire restaurant staff deemed White Mike due to there being another manager of the same name with the only difference being their complexion, approached me. He had mistaken me and my coworker as the same person and was asking me about her report. His demeanor was careless and attached. No sensitivity or concern was shown. He didn't bother to address me by any name, however incorrect it may have been. And he actually, now that I think about it, didn't actually take me to another room either. So he was addressing me in the restaurant kitchen when this took place. It was almost as if he was looking through us, me and my coworker, that is. Even when trying to mend a wound as deep as sexual harassment, he didn't even bother to truly look at her or me, or even bother to learn our faces, to separate and make us individual people. He didn't think it was worth his time, I think. When I got off work, I was extremely angry and upset. I immediately told my mom what had happened. I described the feeling of being looked through, the feeling of being combined into a single, insignificant, and ultimately ignored being with my coworker. My mom instantly knew that he was white, no questions asked. She told me not to be surprised by this anymore, not to be surprised by the utter disregard, the lack of empathy, and the carelessness that white men in this country weaponize against Black women in pain. Suddenly, I remember that she had seen this so many times and that I had seen her go through it, and now it felt like it was my turn. My heart ached knowing that her words were true. And I just want to implore all of you, especially those of you who are in positions of power, to respect and empathize with everyone you meet, regardless of race, gender, or class. And I would like to say that the most important takeaway that I think I have gained from this experience is that this is just the first step, and it is an important step on a very long journey. Because my mom has also gone through this. My sister has also experienced this. My brother has also experienced this. So it's very deep rooted, but I have hope because of opportunities such as this, because of panels, and because of my fellow speakers, and because of the passion that we all have to change this. So once again, a very deep thank you from me. And yeah, just remember to practice empathy and understanding as long as you can. I'm going to pass the stage now to Lashana.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Madeira, again for sharing your lived experience. And to our audience, I want to invite you all to continue to comment in the chat if something pulls at you or if something stands out. And if you happen to see my mini co-host right here run by, don't be surprised. That is my son. So my name is LaShawn Miles, and I'm a marriage and family therapist trainee with Granite Wellness. And this is the first time I've ever had an opportunity like this one with an employer who recognizes there's a need and actually opens the floor to address it. So I will also be reading, and I'm more of an unconstructed poet. So it is not necessarily a full lived experience. So I want to start with the question, have you ever felt stressed or pressured? Pressured to be the first and possibly the only. I'm not talking about the stress from being on a national television show with some new product, hoping to get the backing of some millionaire. I'm talking about the pressure to exist. Many of my people are groomed to kill each other, fighting for street corners they will never own because they believe power is in the strength of fear, not wealth. And a business is a place we walk into, and ownership is so far beyond their reach that they doubt that their dreams could ever be their lived successes. You fear my very existence, but have you helped create the idea of us and them as monsters, the monsters of the dark? Step into this darkness, hold my heart in your hand, choose to become enlightened by the warmth of my spirit, because I am tired of the pressure of having to exist according to the bland, colorless standards of your world. You will no longer refer to me as aggressive. Instead, recognize that I am passionate and expressive. Have you ever considered the idea that subconsciously within my culture, that our voice and laughter are naturally louder than yours because it's never had the opportunity to be heard and respected beyond the circle of our people due to your self-diagnosed uncomfortableness? Equality does not exist. And until you recognize this as the standard of treatment prescribed to Black African Americans, you will continue to be a symptom that asks us to tell our story and engage in internalized calculated warfare that externally explodes, leaving you fearful of the real me. How will you ever know how to get through to me if you never let me be me? We are starting to see a change in the current that many Black African American people typically feel drowned by. What does this mean? It means that Black African Americans are rebuffing the attempts to muffle the uncertainty of our daily experiences. Rebuffing is defined as rejecting someone or something in an abrupt or ungracious manner. This rebuff is announced to the world as looting, protesting, and recording our encounters with the people you place on a pedestal. For many of you, this constant visual presentation of the representation of the people and experiences that we encounter is baffling to you. But it's confirmation that the us we present to you is the safer option. Earlier, I presented the fact that equality does not exist. And may I suggest that it will never exist. And here is where I offer the alternative named equity. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. None of our experiences are the same, even within the Black African American community. Operating from the lens of equity not only helps you collaborate with the person based on their diverse needs, it also gives you the opportunity to approach people from what I termed the your name goes here centered approach. You include the systemic or system view of equity, then you're thinking equity is ownership of assets that may have debts or liabilities attached to them. Black African culture is not something you pick up at your local supermarket. And it's not something you treat as an asset to make your company look good because it is now diversified. When you view our presence according to this business-oriented definition of equity, then you begin to see anyone who is not like you as a potential liability and threat. The threat is not us. The threat is the image you place on us. Black African American children are suspended from school for wearing their hair and expressing the uniqueness of their culture. I ask you, is the threat a person's culture, or is it the fear that you lack culture? Black African Americans attempting to sell their homes receive higher offers when they remove their family photos and replace them with photos of white European families. For those of us in the professional world, we hear from you that we are articulate, well-mannered, and that we should smile more. At home, we tell ourselves that we should be accepting of the microaggressions, micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations professionals deal us every day. So who do we turn to when there is no one in a position of power who can identify with our experiences or empathize with the possibilities of our thought processes? You wondered why you have been getting the surface level, bare minimum coworker or client, and it's because there has been an injury in the interpersonal relationship between Blacks, Browns, Whites, and we don't trust you. You tell me to advocate for myself, and unless I use the same blueprint constructed by your standards, I'm termed angry and unapproachable. Black African Americans are filtering into restricted places, accessing and scraping away at the things you say we need to move and shake in your world. And now that we are saturating these things, they are no longer valuable. You don't own your business. The people who use your services and products do, because without them, you wouldn't be successful. We are a part of the people, no matter how hard we all try to escape it. And the hatred, fighting, and killing is only going to get worse. My thought for you to consider is, what position benefits longevity in maintaining and building interpersonal relationships and difficult conversations? It's the position that explores equity, approaches with love, and cracks the door to let in the realistic understanding of the way the world is moving. Because the stronger you fight to make someone fit your image, sooner you will inadvertently increase your chances of becoming obsolete and isolated. I know sometimes you can't escape the air you breathe, even if it's lethal. So let these thoughts fill your lungs and learn to live free from your own toxicity. You're not disposable, which means you have some value to add no matter who you are. Just like in a relationship, the grass is greener on the other side, but it requires a different level of maintenance. And when you find out what works for them, you take the tips, not an actual patch of grass. The same can be said about how we approach cultural conversations, because the standard for this conversation does not always apply concretely to the next. question where you are presently if you want to see progress in your future. You wouldn't have had to be concerned with me today if you invested in me yesterday for our tomorrow. You are inevitable. Your goal is to be better than the future you. If you put a blindfold on, how many voices are you listening to? Have you learned something new outside of your circle? And the last one is, for those of us who believe in a higher power, God's behind the wheel. You're behind God, telling him the stops you want to make along the way. So what passengers of hatred or love have you picked up along the way? Some of you ask, why this picture of my son in husband's hands? I chose this picture because it's a reminder that I always thought the safest place for my son was in my stomach, because I know the limitations of my body. I can run far and fast from danger. But I realized he wasn't created to be hidden. His name is Isaiah, and he spent 6 days in the NICU because I now recognize I didn't engage in the immediate need for self-care. Remember, question where you are presently if you want to see progress in your future. I recognized something was wrong before the doctor did. I told them to take him and directed my husband to be by his side as I calmly waited to be stitched up and transferred to another room. I never wavered because I knew no matter the outcome, God made the choice. He was taken away and I slept peacefully, waiting for the next selection of food because my faith in emergency medical technician education provided me comfort. But I ask you, what is the foundation of your beliefs built on that potentially has you trapped and unopened to difficult conversation? Previously, I said his name is Isaiah, and it's of African origin, meaning God gave me you, a gift from God, this king and chosen prophet. Every time I speak his name, I speak his purpose into his life. Referencing God's behind the wheel and you're behind God, telling him the stops you want to make along the way, I see he will have to travel his path without me carrying him. And now I recognize the most effective and safest place I could be for him is in his head. So who or what is in yours after this seminar? And I want to thank you for your heart and for proving that I could trust you with mine. And now we give you the lived experience of Miss Alexis Walker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis. I wanted to share a story from when I was younger. I was probably about 4 years old, and I had gone to the grocery store with my stepmother, who is a white woman. And she, I remember very, very like palpably, like the feeling of being in this grocery store. And I remember the height that I was. I remember holding on to like the belt loop of my stepmother's pants. And I had kind of bumped into an older gentleman, and he turned around and he said, "Hey, watch where you're going." And I looked at him and he then exclaimed, "Yes, you." And I was confused because as a 4-year-old, like, what do you do in a situation when there's like a grown adult speaking very hostile to you? So my stepmother went over to him and asked what was wrong. And he then began to say, "This is between me and her, and she's the wrong color anyways." And then there were people around who were watching it, who were just telling her to stop engaging because he was crazy, or I don't know. But people just watched it happen. Nobody did anything about it. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I had many experiences like this growing up in a predominantly white town, that have continued to inform how I feel about myself today in terms of being Black enough, or being too Black, or trying to be a specific type of person in different spaces so as to be accepted. So I am in a doctoral program now, and before I graduated from my undergraduate program, I wrote a poem for one of my classes that was supposed to look at what a world might look like if there was no conflict because of difference. And I'm going to share that poem with you today. It reads as, when I try to think about a world without conflicts regarding difference, a world where I am free to exist, safe to exist, encouraged and allowed to wholly exist as a woman, as a Black woman, as a queer Black woman, I think about a world in which I and everyone around me gets to intimately know absolute freedom. And yet, to get here, to see this beautiful image of complete sovereignty, I must first become painfully aware of the opposite reality, which is that I am not free. I do not hold freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom to love, freedom to exist without fear of retribution. Neither do I see others like me overflowing with the right to just be as they are, who they are, unapologetically free. When I think about a world without conflicts regarding difference, I imagine the safe, warm, nurturing mother, one that holds my difference with deep, deep reverence, the one who allows me to grow and helps me to know my unwavering worth. I want everyone to imagine a world without conflicts regarding our differences, a world where we don't resort to violence as a response to our variances. I want everyone to imagine the taste of freedom, the feeling of sovereignty, the absolute joy of what it is like to be seen. Only then will our yearning for love finally outweigh our urges to hate. Only then will our desire for liberation encourage us to take control of the realities we create. Thank you for listening.
So before, thank you, Alexis. That was a beautiful poem. Before I stop sharing, I wanted to say this. So we know that Madera did introduce herself as an artist. So I wanted to recognize her for providing some of the art for our PowerPoint. She actually created 2 pieces. So I'll go back to her slide. So this piece was a hello. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having some issues. Okay, this one was a self-portrait piece that she created. And then this other piece was one that she provided for us as well. So I thought they were amazing and beautiful, and I'm really happy that she shared them with us and that we were able to use them for our presentation. So yay, thank you. Thank you for sharing those with us.
Well, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, they're actually both self-portraits, but the one for Alexis's slide, the hair is obviously different, but they are both self-portraits. And it's great to see them displayed like this. I rarely ever, put my art out there for display. So it's great. And I just love that it was for an opportunity like this. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. So really quickly, we just kind of wanted to go around and maybe discuss a little bit about what speaking or listening from the heart really means for us, and how, sharing these lived experiences are helpful and useful in this sort of setting. So I'll just go first by saying, kind of reiterating what I had said before in my little spiel, just about how, we in the Black community, we really are looking for allyship at this point. A lot of the stuff that we go through, even today, a lot of things are mostly what I hear is kind of this rebuttal of, this is a different time and you guys aren't, dealing with the same things that your ancestors dealt with, and you should be grateful. And you're not slaves now, and then this and that. And that those sort of rebuttals aren't listening from your heart. And because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it isn't happening. And I think sometimes we do need to kind of open our minds and open our hearts to other people and other people's experience. And I think that's why personally I wanted to have these conversations, to open up a dialogue with many cultures, and especially my own, because I've seen situations where, especially in the mental health field, where people are turned away or they don't feel like they're being heard because of this kind of communication block that happens. And, they might not be speaking in a way that is proper, or, in a way that is being received by another person. And this is detrimental when it comes to somebody's mental health. And so I'm hoping that having these sort of panels and conversations will really help someone who is working in this field, mental health professional, be more open-minded and be able to provide quality care for everyone, not just someone who's like them. So, yeah. Does anyone else want to comment?
I would like to say thank you for everyone who responded in the Q&A and interacted with the speakers. It was really wonderful to hear some of you sharing your own stories. It was really, really amazing, because honestly, that is the point of what we were doing. We did want you guys to, respond and engage and all of that. So it was just great to hear that even people from different cultures, such as Kevin, could relate to such an extent that they felt the need to share. So it was great. Thank you.
One comment that I'm seeing was shared. I want to read this because I think it's a great little excerpt. So it says, first time I've heard this term allyship, and I love it. Allyship is a continual investment of time in supporting others, holding ourselves accountable when mistakes are made, apologizing, and being prepared to rework the approach towards allyship as needs change.
Yes, I would definitely agree. Allyship, it can be a very powerful thing in the right hands, right? Like with the right intentions in the right hands. And one thing that I will say that I've noticed throughout us telling our stories is that it takes a lot of disarming on both sides, both for the listener and the speaker. It does involve a lot of shedding of like your armor and your weapons to hear someone say, someone that looked like you did something to me. And also for you to say, something like this happened to me. It takes a lot of strength and courage. And yeah, I think just like Christine said, don't let it fade away. Christine in the Q&A section said there's a conversation that is important and we should not let it fade away. Because as I said after, my telling my story, that this is an ongoing thing that we're going to have to work through. This is deep rooted, it's generational. It's not something that we can let fade away. It's something we have to constantly go back to and remember to be patient with. So.
Absolutely.
To piggyback on this concept of allyship, and today we're talking about race, but we could add any ism into this same framework, whether it's racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever. My mother, has this term. She says, these things are like the smog in the air that we breathe every day. And it's impossible. Think of that visual of smog in the air. You can't go outside if there's smog in the air and not breathe some of it in. It's impossible. And it's much the same with all of these different oppressions, whether it be racism, sexism, homophobia, what have you. We've all learned, you know, I really truly believe that we have all learned and internalized these ideas about each other based on these different categories. And none of us have gone unaffected. And so the one thing that I say to myself, you know, when I look at other ways that I might perpetuate some of this stuff, that I have to stop lying to myself in thinking that I haven't been affected. And that's what I want from my allies around racism, is to stop lying to yourself, that you haven't been affected and that you don't have the capacity to make mistakes, to have internalized some beliefs about people who look like me. It's impossible to live on this planet that we call Earth and not have taken in some stuff. And there's no shame in that, because nobody asked to be given these things. Nobody asked to be taught these ways of thinking and being towards others. They happened. And let's get on with being honest with ourselves about the fact that we have it, and that we get to unlearn it. We get to unlearn these things. And I know that as I challenge myself in the areas where I need work, that I get to learn so much and I get to get free. And when we talk about being free, you know, for me, what that means is being free from ideas that I have held, that I've learned and internalized, that keep me from being able to fully love all of humanity, not just be tolerant of, but to actually love all of humanity. That's the kind of freedom that I'm talking about. That's real freedom to me. And so I invite all of you to challenge yourselves, to investigate those areas in yourselves where there's work to be done. Yeah, and you know, there's a church that I go to that I really enjoy, and the pastor, you know, does a sermon on that every now and then. He's like, "Stop lying." You know, if racism is better, why we got so many problems? You know, if sexism is no longer present, why we got so many problems? You know, if homophobia doesn't exist, why we got so many problems? Somebody lying. So let's stop lying. Get honest with ourselves about the work that we have to do. And that's what's going to lead to true allyship for all of us. So thank you for listening.
So I wanted to just share a couple of comments that we have in the Q&A really quick before we move on. So one comment was that it says honest that we have been racist and we have to accept that and other biases. So I liked that because I think a lot of times people are afraid to admit when they've been racist. And you know, if it's happened, then it's happened, but being able to admit it and seek change, there's no way for you to move forward and to grow from an experience if you can't admit the truth. So I think that that's important. A very good point that you made there. And then one more before, we'll address more at the end as well, but this next one says, language is very important. In my own experience working in mental health, are the differences in how a client POC is perceived. Their lived experience is not taken into account, i.e. trauma. It's more, she's angry, he's lazy. They're being extremely difficult and resistant. They don't respect authority. He's a troublemaker. These are all comments I've heard when referring to African-American clients in a predominantly white county. So these biases spill over into definitely mental health, into, you know, even physical health, going to the hospitals. We see that there are actual statistics of, let's say for childbirth, with higher rates of Black women dying during childbirth because of inadequate care that they're getting in hospitals. And a lot of it has to do with how they're being perceived by these doctors and these medical care workers. So yeah, it definitely, it bleeds into not just dealing with community or, you know, dealing with peers. It's in the workforce, it's in your physical health, mental health, all of that. So just be aware of that as well. So we're gonna move on. If anyone doesn't have any more comments, I'm gonna share my screen again.
And Shamari, I know one of our participants asked for more explanation on code switching, and then Thomas also had his hand raised earlier.
Okay, so we just have a couple more slides, and then we can get back to those. So we just have this what's next step. What are the next steps? And one of the big things, well, I guess the first 2 points here are understanding culture and educating yourself. So just comments I have on that is it's important to understand other cultures so that you know how to approach a certain situation. And like I said, that's kind of why we're bringing these conversations to light, to kind of invoke people to reach out and seek more education for themselves in understanding culture, because I don't think we quite understand how culturally incompetent sometimes, you know, and I think it's across this, just Americans in general, I think can be very culturally incompetent and don't necessarily seek out learning about other cultures because we're so kind of engrossed in our own culture and our own thing. It's very much me, and I in American culture. So broadening your understanding of culture is only going to be helpful for you. It's going to help you kind of set aside those biases that you might have. You might have a better understanding of the person that you're sitting across from and having this conversation with. And it helps with your ability to listen from your heart. And this last point about reaching out and asking questions, one conversation that I thought was really important that we had when we were kind of talking about what is it that we want to give, you know, our listeners for the next steps, was reaching out and asking questions. But kind of this side note that we discussed was not every Black person that you come across is going to want to sit down and have this conversation and explain to you why they feel a certain way, or, you know, why they're in a certain position. Not everyone wants to be an educator. Not everyone wants to, like, some people are not comfortable with that. So I think before you start reaching out, because sometimes we feel it's easier to just reach out and be like, hey, you're a Black person, what is it that you feel about this? Or what is it that you feel about that? That might be easiest for you, but it's not necessarily going to be easiest for that person. So what I say is do your own research first and understand it from another source before you just automatically reach out. And always ask if a person is comfortable with having this conversation before you just start asking questions, because that person might not want to discuss. Yeah. Did anybody else want to add anything or?
Yeah, I wanted to add in a little something to that. Thank you, Shamari. You know, what I have always found is really important in learning about another culture, or, you know, just, you know, another way of being in the world in general, is the importance of building relationship. You know, that to me has been one of the big missing pieces in how we get to know what's going on with people in other spaces, is taking the time, being intentional about building relationship. You know, If you want to, as an example, you know, if you want to know more about Black experiences, and I say experiences because there is no one Black experience, just as there's no one white experience. Everybody's having all kinds of different variations in their experience. But if you want to know more, be intentional about building relationships with Black people, you know, friendships, get to know, you know, take a risk in getting in building a friendship and getting to know somebody. And that doesn't mean just, you know, talking to your coworker at work. That means, hey, you want to go grab a bite? You want to go grab a coffee? Hey, how about I invite you over to my place? You want to come over for dinner? Or, you know, things like that, you know, breaking bread with people. How big is that? You know, when we actually take time to break bread with another individual, you know, a lot of things open up over a meal, you know, with good intention, the intention of getting to know, becoming friends, finding out, you know, what are this person's likes and dislikes? What are their hobbies? You know, what are things that are important to them in the world? Building friendship, so critical. And the more that we're able to do that, then when it comes to reaching out and asking questions, if you've built a friendship and you've built up some trust, you got some money in the bank, so to speak, with that person, they're going to be much more likely to want to share with you authentically. You know, going back to that quote, if I don't know, can we put that quote up real quick one more time, Shamari? Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to mention about that quote and reading further in the book after this quote was delivered, you know, there was no distinction made about like which mode is better. It's just saying that like they're different and we need to understand that. You know, what the author went on to talk about in terms of what happens for many of us as Black people and trying to navigate through this quote unquote white mode is that because of the tendency of it to be low key, dispassionate, impersonal, is that it's hard for us as Black people, if that's the only way you're relating to us, it's hard for us to trust you. Because if we can't get some passion and some energy out of you, it's like, we don't know if you're really telling the truth about where you're coming from. You know, so I'm speaking in my cultural vernacular a little bit here. It's like, we look at you kind of like, I don't know where this person's coming from. If I can't get some energy out this person, you know what I mean? Like some, you know, some spiritual energy, some intensity, and, you know, like, I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know if I can trust you. So you're not going to get from us where we're really coming from if you can't meet us there somewhere along that line. So in order to build that trust, it's really important to be invested in having relationship. You know, there's a lot of stuff going around about anti-bias work and, you know, becoming an anti-racist. And again, I kind of allude back to these conversations that I have with my mother. You know, we're talking about the difference between, there's a big difference between learning how to be anti-racist and actually learning how to love Black people. It's a completely different idea. So what kind of investment are you willing to make in learning how to love Black people? Start there.
Okay, thank you, Jamal. So I'm gonna go back to the end. So we do have a resource page for anyone who, I believe we're gonna be sending out these resources as well, but the PACE website has a lot of amazing anti-racism resources. There is a podcast that I personally enjoy. It's brought by, and I think it's NPR. It's called Code Switch, and they address just a vast majority of cultures and issues within those cultures. It's an amazing podcast. I really enjoy it. There's also an app that I recently was brought aware of. It's called BLAP, and it's an app that you can download, and in your area, you can search up Black-owned businesses to support Black-owned businesses. So then we also have the book that the quote was shared from. It's called Black and White Styles of Conflict by Thomas Kochman. If anyone would like to read that book, that would be a great resource as well to learn a little bit more about styles of communication. And then Granite Wellness Center's website, we will have a page up on our resource page that will have this recording. If anyone wants to go back to it or share it, we would appreciate sharing, this with anyone. And then also we had a little bit, we didn't talk a little about it. I don't know if LaShawn wants to give a quick kind of synopsis of the motivational interviewing and how that could be useful. We did want to leave some time for questions, but we can, LaShawn, if you wanted to share a little bit on that before we did.
Yes. So motivational interviewing is mostly used for helping someone engage in change talk. So if someone is utilizing substances, if, they're engaging in a behavior that's not conducive to them, being successful, or just all different types of things. But motivational interviewing can help in any type of conversation, especially one as difficult as understanding or learning about new cultures. And it's mostly oars plus eyes. So asking open-ended questions. When you're talking to someone, you also want to affirm what they're saying by stating something positive that they're doing. There's reflecting back to them what they're saying so that they feel validated and you both have an understanding of what each other is saying, and summarizing. And then lastly, after you've done all that, and the person feels validated and heard, there's information giving. And information giving involves asking the question, I hear what you're saying, can I provide you some information? Can I give you some information? And so it's motivational interviewing, and the techniques are oars plus eyes. And it's a game changer for when you want to have conversation and difficult conversation. And we have Shelly has her hand raised, and Shamari, if you wanted to also talk about code switching. And if anybody else, we also have the floor open for questions.
Yeah, so we'll let Shelly go first, and then I'll go into the code switch.
Thank you, guys. I just on that previous slide, did you mention the PACES connection resource as well? Okay, good.
Yes, I did.
So much to reflect on. I just want to thank you all so much. I've been writing notes. I think you definitely helped me and us to better understand a lot here. And I'm grateful for that. So I'm grateful for the vulnerability and that, just like I said earlier, entering in this brave space. But just a couple of things that really stand out. Jamal was talking about building relationships and part of that is communication, right? Like we're talking about building bridges and communication. So we have build a relationship to better our ability to communicate. And one of the things Jamal always does, and I've known him for a number of years, but he always calls me, to find this most endearing term, calls me sister. And I know that that's an endearing term. And I feel like, okay, this is my brother, I'm his sister, he's my brother. So we can have this relationship, and I really appreciate that. And then, Madara touched on respect and empathize with everyone, regardless of age, race, or class. And that's just a simple tip that I'm taking away. And LaShawn talking about equity versus equality, and I heard you and I felt you so powerfully when you shared your poem, LaShawn. It's still sitting with me, and I want to remind everyone that this is going to be recorded, so you can view it again or later, and or share with people, because we'll be sharing the link out. And, you know, and the term allyship and what that means to me, and how this is really another just key takeaway that I'm taking with me. So thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Shelley. So let's go over just really quickly. I'll give kind of a brief definition of code switching. So code switching is when someone kind of switches between these different language codes, I guess you could say. So for me personally, it would be like I talked about the AAVE, the use of African American Vernacular English, and how this is not a very widely accepted vernacular, but it is an actual, it's a recognized language. It has like linguistic rules to it. So it is recognized as a language. However, coming into a workplace and using AAVE is seen as unprofessional. So what a lot of Black people will do is they will use sort of, I guess we could say, go into their white mode of communication, and they'll use code switching to speak in a different code. So this isn't the same way that they would necessarily speak with their family or their friends, but it's kind of like their work voice, some people will say. But it can happen across, you know, different modes of language. But personally, this is how I've seen it and how I've used it, and kind of where I learned what I learned about it in my class. So yeah, I hope that made sense. You can definitely Google it. There's so much like research on code switching articles. There's all types of things you can read about code switching as well.
Mari, are you willing to give an example, or would you like me to give an example?
Ooh, do you have an example? Okay, go for it.
So if we were to be talking to friends that we know, it may sound like, girl, what's up? What you been up to? What are you doing? I miss you. Like, where you been? Versus if we walk into the workplace, hi, how are you? Oh, it's nice to see you. I'm happy that you came today. One is very mellow and drawn out, and the other is very lively and energetic.
Yes, beautiful examples. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
One of my favorite comedians put it this way. He said, we have our cultural vernacular, our cultural language, and then we have our job interview language.
Yes. So let's see, I'm going to go into the comments. Oh, one comment just came in and said it may come out when speaking with another African-American coworker versus non. So that might be somewhere you might see that or hear that. So yes, thank you. Thank you everybody for all your comments. Let's see. Thank you for sharing your story. Leslie said, thank you to everyone for the deeply meaningful words and stories. I hope we can have more conversations in our community. I love the reminder to listen from the heart. Yes, thank you. And we will definitely be bringing more conversations like this in. We'll absolutely let you guys know. Granite is going to be putting on more of these recovery and wellness, cultural communication, or cultural conversations about culture. They're going to be bringing in more cultures. I think the next one we're having, our CEO is going to be sitting down with someone and speaking more about the Latino Latinx community, I believe. So look out for that one as well. And then I know we've talked about bringing up more stuff. So hopefully all of us can come together and present some more of these for you guys. So yeah, it looks like everyone's just saying thank you. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. Our emails are here if you guys would like to jot those down before you head out and shoot us an email, collaboration, anything you guys want to shoot us an email about. Those are up there for you guys. Leslie said she would love to have a small group discussion. That's a great idea. Definitely shoot me an email about that. We can definitely see about doing that. But yeah, thank you guys all for being here.
Lastly, I just want to say we're doing an evaluation. A link to the evaluation will be sent out as well with the slides.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes. Ooh, a comment we got was a suggestion for a conversation with biracial people. That's a really good idea. I'm gonna have to write that down. All right, yep, I think that's it. Thank you guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.